I've never told anyone this before, not the way it actually happened. People at work think I'm calm, patient, the guy who never snaps no matter how much pressure you put on him. But the truth is, I snapped long before anybody realized it. Quietly, the way a bone breaks under enough weight without a sound. And it all started the morning my boss leaned across my desk, lowered his voice, and told me he'd cut my salary unless I agreed to become his personal assistant. Unpaid. I remember exactly how he said it. He used this tone like he was doing me some kind of favor, like I should be grateful he even considered me worthy of serving him. The office was almost empty that morning, just the whir of the copy machine and the smell of burnt coffee from the break room. He stood there with his tie crooked, tapping his wedding ring on the edge of my desk as if keeping time with my pulse. "You're organized, right?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "Good. From now on, I need you handling my scheduling. Calls, emails, personal errands. You'll still do your job, of course. But this comes first." I stared at him, thinking I must have misunderstood. "Is this a promotion?" He laughed like I'd told a joke I didn't understand. "No, Grant. This is loyalty. And if loyalty is a problem for you, then I'll adjust your pay accordingly." That was the moment something inside me clicked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, final switch. Because you have to understand, this wasn't some huge corporation with 10,000 employees. This was a local tech solutions office with barely 30 people. We all shared the same coffee pot, the same crammed hallway, the same secondhand chairs with the stuffing coming out. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone saw everything. And everyone knew our boss, Thomas, played favorites like it was a sport. He didn't yell, he didn't throw things, he didn't need to. He humiliated people with a smile. He made you feel like you should thank him for disrespecting you. Most people learn to survive by staying small and quiet. A few, the unlucky ones, got chosen as targets. And on that particular day, he finally decided it was my turn. I didn't react. I didn't argue. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of shock. I just said, "Okay, for now." He smiled, patted my shoulder like I'd just promised to fetch his dry cleaning, and walked away with that heavy-footed confidence of a man who believes he's untouchable. I watched him go, feeling the first thin wire of anger wrap around my ribs. Tight, cold, almost clinical. The funny part? He genuinely believed I'd cave. He thought I needed the job enough to swallow anything he threw at me. And for a long time, he was right. I had bills. I had obligations. I had a life built around routines I didn't want to lose. But that day, when he walked into his glass-walled office and shut the door behind him, something shifted inside me I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't scared of losing my job. I was scared of becoming someone who let men like him decide what he was worth. I sat there, staring at my monitor, hands still on the keyboard, pretending to work while my heart beat so steadily it almost felt like it wasn't beating at all. The hum of the office grew sharper. The air felt thinner. There was a part of me waiting for panic to set in, but it never came. Instead, there was this strange clarity, like someone had wiped the fog off a window I didn't know was dirty. Thomas walked past me again an hour later, waving his phone like I was already his assistant. "I forwarded you my calendar invites. Block next Friday. Personal appointment." He didn't even slow down. I watched him walk toward a payroll to chat with Linda, probably telling her to adjust my hours, my pay, or whatever punishment he had in mind to motivate me. He thought fear was the only language people understood. He thought threats kept us obedient. But sometimes threats do something else. They wake you up. I kept replaying his words. Loyalty, adjust your pay, comes first. It felt less like a work conversation and more like someone spitting in your food and insisting you thank them for the flavor. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room. My coworkers filtered in and out, giving me those small, apologetic glances people reserve for someone they can't help but pity. They must have heard. The office walls weren't thin. The people were. But nobody said anything. Nobody offered comfort. Nobody wanted trouble with Thomas. He'd trained them well. I ate in silence, feeling this quiet, steady weight settle in my chest. Not sadness, not fear, just certainty. I wasn't going to let this become my life. Something had changed in me, and I couldn't undo it. And while Thomas strutted around the office like a man who'd secured another obedient worker, I understood something he didn't. I wasn't agreeing to his terms. I was biding my time. When the clock hit 5 and most people left, I stayed. The office emptied until it was just the distant hum of the servers and the soft buzz of the lights above me. Thomas had gone home early. He always did. Important men needed rest, after all. I sat there alone, watching the reflection of my own face in the black screen of my monitor. The day had started like any other, but it wasn't. It was the day a line got drawn, and he didn't even notice he'd crossed it. And then, in that empty office, I realized something even more important, something that made my pulse slow and my breath steady. He had no idea that by threatening me, he'd just given me the one thing I'd been avoiding for months, a reason to fight back. И последняя строка, части. I turned off my monitor, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the office, knowing there was no going back. Not anymore. The next morning, when I walked into the office, Thomas didn't even look up from his laptop. He just waved his hand at me like I was late to my shift at a restaurant. Grant, I sent a list of tasks to your inbox. Handle those first. I sat down, opened my email, and felt my jaw tighten. The list wasn't work. It wasn't even close to work. Dry cleaning pickup, a grocery list, 2 packages to ship, a dentist appointment he wanted me to reschedule for him, and, my favorite, remind me to drink more water. I stared at the screen, the glow reflecting off the window behind me. Someone walked past my desk, glanced at my monitor, and immediately looked away. Everyone knew what was happening. They just didn't want to breathe too close to it. I checked the time. 9:07 a.m. By 9:10, he was already messaging me on Teams. Thomas, did you see the list? Need ETA? Me, working through it, he replied with a thumbs-up emoji, the kind that somehow carried more contempt than any insult he could have typed. It was strange watching a grown man weaponize emojis like that. The first hour passed in this thick, heavy silence where I was technically at work, but doing nothing related to my actual job. Every time my real task dinged into my inbox, I felt that same cold thread of anger pulling tight, like stitches closing a wound. Around 11, Thomas called out from his office without even turning his head. Grant, I need you to print something for me, and bring me a coffee while you're at it. I didn't answer. I just stood, walked to the machine, pressed print, and listened to the pages slide out one by one. When I brought them to him, he didn't say thanks. He didn't look up. He just snapped his fingers toward the corner of his desk. Put it there. I set the papers down, turned to leave, and he added, Oh, pick up my wife's package during lunch. She ordered the wrong size shoes again. Tell them she wants an exchange. He said it with the tone of a man who had never returned anything himself, because the world returned itself for him. I walked out of his office with this numb prickling behind my ribs, that tension where anger hasn't exploded yet, but is quietly boiling, waiting for you to give it a direction. But that was just the beginning. The real shift happened after lunch when I came back with his wife's package. The moment I put it on his desk, he leaned back, hands behind his head, and said, You know, Grant, if you do this right, I might consider bumping you up when bonuses come around. Bonuses in our company. Where the bonus pool was a myth everyone pretended to believe in, so Thomas could use it as bait. I looked at him. Not angry, not frustrated, just observing. It hit me then that this wasn't about money, power, or even ego. It was about control. Thomas collected people the way some men collect watches. Trophies he could point at and say, This one agrees with me. And for a long time, I had been one of those people. I walked back to my desk and opened the drawer where I kept my headphones. Underneath them was a small digital voice recorder I'd bought months ago for a personal project. The kind you clip behind a notebook or slide under your shirt collar. My fingers paused over it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just humiliated. I was done pretending it was temporary. I closed the drawer slowly, quietly, the click of the metal sounding louder in my mind than in the room. But instead of pulling the recorder out, I took out my phone and opened our chat history. Every unreasonable demand, every loyalty speech, every schedule change at 11 p.m., every threat framed as guidance. I scrolled and scrolled, the timeline of manipulation stretching back further than even I remembered. And then I saw it. A message from 2 weeks ago. Need you to come in early tomorrow. Don't put it on your hours. Consider it part of growing as a team player. Growing as a team player. I should have said something then. I didn't. But now I had a reason to stop apologizing to myself for being angry. Around 3 p.m., Thomas walked out of his office again, holding his jacket over one arm. I'm heading out early. I left a few things on your desk for tomorrow. Don't forget the dry cleaning this time. Last time they mixed up my suits. Last time, I had never in my life picked up his suits. Before I could respond, he smirked like he'd scored a point in a game only he was playing. And something inside me, that final strand of patience, snapped cleanly. As the door closed behind him, the office felt heavier and somehow quieter. A few co-workers peeked up from their screens. Their faces held that stiff mixture of sympathy and fear, the kind people wear when they know a storm is coming but hope it'll land somewhere else. I opened the folder he'd left. More tasks. A handwritten note. You've got potential. Don't disappoint me. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Instead, I took a breath. Slow, steady, and pulled out my notebook. Not the one for work, the other one. The one with a hard black cover, clean pages, and no company logo. I opened to the first clean page and wrote a date, then another line beneath it, then another. I stopped being the hero that day. Not the good employee, not the quiet one, not the man who lets things slide because he wants peace. When I closed the notebook, my pulse was calm, steady, clear. I wasn't collecting tasks anymore. I was collecting evidence. The sun had already dipped behind the tinted office windows when I finally shut down my computer. My reflection shimmered in the glass. Tired eyes, tight jaw, a man who looked like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. As I walked out, locking the door behind me, one thought kept echoing in the back of my mind. Soft, certain, undeniable. He thought I was under his thumb. He had no idea I was the one tightening the grip. The next 2 weeks felt like living in two different worlds at the same time. On the surface, nothing had changed. I still came in early, still sat at my desk near the window with the crooked blinds, still heard Thomas's shoes stomping down the hallway like he was announcing himself to the whole building every morning. But underneath it all, underneath the polite good mornings and the fake calm, something had shifted, quietly, deeply, permanently. I wasn't playing his game anymore. I was documenting it. Every message, every unreasonable task, every friendly suggestion that came with a threat behind it. Every moment where he treated me like furniture instead of a human being. And the more I collected, the clearer it became. I wasn't the only one. He'd done this too. It started small. A passing comment from Sarah in accounting. He's asking you to do his errands now? He used to do that with Ben, before Ben quit. A whispered warning from Mia in HR. If he told you not to log certain hours, save everything. Don't delete a thing. A knowing glance from Daniel in IT when Thomas yelled across the room, Grant, fix my printer. It's not part of your job, but you're good with your hands. People weren't surprised by his behavior. They were surprised someone wasn't taking it quietly. By the end of the second week, my notebook was half full. Recorded times, screenshots, copied emails, witnesses, even details of conversations he didn't know were echoing across cubicles, but I didn't confront him. Not yet. I waited. For what? For the moment he would go too far. The moment he would give me not just proof, but leverage. And that moment arrived on a Wednesday morning, 9:31 a.m. He slammed his office door so hard the windows rattled. Everyone went still. He marched straight to my desk, eyes sharp, jaw clenched, phone in hand. "What did you tell the auditors?" The room froze. Every keyboard stopped. Every conversation died mid-sentence. I blinked once, slowly, calmly. "I haven't talked to anyone." He stepped closer, too close, the smell of his cologne sharp and bitter. "Don't lie to me. I saw the report. Someone sent in a complaint about overtime discrepancies and misuse of labor, and your name was all over the time logs." I felt something tighten in the air, like the whole office was leaning in, holding its breath. "Thomas," I said evenly, "I haven't talked to anyone. I haven't sent anything to anyone. Maybe you should ask the people you've been leaning on for years." He opened his mouth to speak, then shut it, because he knew I wasn't the only one he mistreated. He just didn't know who else was tired of him. He jabbed a finger toward my chest. "Stay out of this. If I find out you said a word—" "You'll what?" I asked softly. His face flickered, not with anger, with surprise, like he couldn't believe I'd spoken back, like a dog he expected to stay quiet had suddenly turned around and bared its teeth. He stepped back a little. Not much, but enough for me to see it. Fear, his first crack. He tried to cover it with bluster. "Get in my office. Now." I followed him, closing the glass door behind us. He paced like a man who'd lost the thread of his own story and was trying to stitch it back together through volume. "You need to understand how this works," he hissed. "You don't escalate problems. You come to me. You don't contact other departments unless I approve it. And you sure as hell don't." He stopped when he saw my phone on the desk. Recording. Screen glowing. His face drained so fast it was almost comical. You're recording this?" he sputtered. "Of course not," I said calmly, picking up the phone and ending the recording with a tap. "You raised your voice. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything important." He stared at me. Not angry now, not smug, just scared. The kind of fear that comes when someone realizes the ground beneath them was rotting long before they noticed the smell. "You delete that," he demanded, voice cracking. "Why?" I asked. "Did you say something you shouldn't have?" His jaw clenched, hard. And then silence. The kind of silence that means something's gone wrong. He sat down heavily, rubbing his forehead. For the first time, I saw the truth. Thomas wasn't powerful. He wasn't in control. He was a man held together by other people's fear of him. And I had stopped being afraid. When I walked out of his office, the entire room went quiet. He stayed behind his glass wall, staring at the floor like he'd lost something and couldn't figure out where. I returned to my desk, opened my notebook, and added a new entry. 9:31 a.m. Confrontation, evidence secured. But the real turning point came later that afternoon. At 4:12 p.m., a message popped up from internal compliance. "Please schedule a meeting tomorrow to review your submitted work logs." My submitted logs. The ones Thomas told me not to record. The ones I saved anyway. The ones that didn't match payroll. I leaned back, breath steady, heartbeat calm. He thought the worst thing I could do was disobey. He never imagined I'd tell the truth. The next day, the meeting room felt colder than usual. 2 compliance officers, 1 HR representative, and me. They asked questions. I answered honestly, calmly, without exaggeration, without emotion, just facts. And facts don't lie. When the meeting ended, one of them looked at me with a quiet seriousness and said, "Thank you for bringing this forward." I hadn't even brought everything forward. Not yet. But then she added, "Several employees have already submitted similar concerns. You weren't the first, but your documentation is the most thorough." That was the moment I felt it. A small, sharp bloom of something like justice rising in my chest. Not victory, not revenge. Just the simple relief. of not being alone. When I stepped back into the hallway, Thomas was standing by the copier, pretending to read a stack of papers. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his hands trembling just enough for me to notice. He glanced at me, just once, and looked away fast. He thought I was gone. I wasn't. I walked past him, calm as ever, and headed back to my desk. There was no triumph, no smirk, no satisfaction, just clarity. This wasn't chaos anymore. This was order, my order, unfolding exactly the way it needed to. And as I shut down my computer that evening, one thought settled over me like the first deep breath after holding it for too long. He'd spent years taking advantage of people because he thought no one would ever push back. Tomorrow, he'd learn what happens when someone finally does. The morning everything finally broke was strangely quiet. Not dramatic, not tense, not loud. Just quiet in that way offices get when people know something they're not allowed to talk about. When I walked in, half the desks were occupied, but nobody was typing. Nobody was chatting. Even the printers sounded softer. Thomas wasn't in yet. His office light was off, blinds half drawn like someone left in a hurry the night before. I took my usual seat, opened my laptop, and for the first time in weeks, there were no messages from him waiting for me. No tasks, no errands, no reminders, just silence. At 9:14, he finally arrived. He didn't stomp down the hallway. He didn't bark orders. He didn't even look around to make sure people noticed him. He walked straight to his office with his shoulders hunched, the door clicking shut behind him without its usual slam. 5 minutes later, a second door opened. The conference room. Compliance, HR, legal. They didn't call his name aloud. They didn't need to. One of them knocked on his glass wall, and even through the blinds, I saw his shoulders jerk, like he'd been caught doing something illegal in public. He followed them into the conference room, the blinds closed, and the entire office exhaled. People didn't cheer, they didn't whisper, they didn't look at each other with smugness or vindication. What they did was breathe. The kind of long, quiet breath you don't realize you've been holding for years. I didn't join the staring. I didn't listen at the door. I didn't try to imagine what was being said. I'd done my part. The rest wasn't my job. I just went back to work. Exactly 40 minutes later, the conference room door opened. HR walked out first, then legal, then compliance, and then Thomas stepped into the hallway. He wasn't the same man, not the man who swaggered, who barked commands, who waited for people to flinch. His tie was crooked, face pale, eyes unfocused like he'd been hit with cold water. He looked around the room, searching for something. Sympathy, maybe. Solid ground, a lifeline. But no one met his eyes. He walked toward his office slowly, each step uneven. He closed the door behind him, and within seconds, the sound of drawers opening echoed through the glass. Papers rustling, items being yanked out, something metallic clattering to the floor. He was packing, not neatly, not calmly, desperately. It wasn't triumph that washed over me, it was clarity. A quiet understanding that what was happening wasn't a show, wasn't revenge, wasn't spectacle. It was simply the end. Long overdue, unavoidable. At 10:27, HR returned with a box, the standard corporate cardboard box. No one ever wants to be handed. They knocked once, entered, said something short. When they stepped out again, Thomas followed, holding the box. He didn't look like a villain, or a tyrant, or a monster. He looked like a man who finally faced the cost of everything he thought he'd get away with. When he passed my desk, he slowed for a moment. Not enough to speak, just enough to acknowledge I was there. His eyes flickered, unsure whether to blame me, thank me, or hate me. In the end, he did none of those things. He just kept walking. He left the building through the main doors, the morning light cutting across him in a long, thin stripe as he stepped outside. HR locked the glass behind him. That was it. The office didn't erupt. People didn't clap. Nobody made speeches. Instead, someone in accounting stood up, stretched, and said, Does anyone want coffee? I'm going downstairs. Normal, calm, peaceful. Life returning to its natural temperature. By noon, an email arrived from corporate. Short, formal, final. Effective immediately, Thomas R. has been terminated following an internal investigation. Interim management structure will be communicated soon. No details. No drama. Just a clean period at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. An hour later, I received a separate email from HR asking me to come to their office. I walked in expecting questions, maybe follow-ups. Instead, they handed me a revised contract, adjusted salary, restored overtime, back pay for months of unrecorded hours, a role change, not a promotion, but a lateral shift to a position that removed me entirely from Thomas's former chain of command. A fresh start without the man who tried to shrink me. I signed it without celebration, without shaking hands, without that false, relieved excitement that people sometimes perform when they want to convince themselves they've won. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like finally being able to stand upright after carrying weight for too long. When I returned to my desk, co-workers stopped by one, not to gossip, not to pry, just to say things like, "Good for you, man. About time. You deserve better." Simple words, soft, sincere. I thanked them and went back to finishing a report, the office around me settling into a kind of peaceful rhythm it hadn't had in years. That evening, after everyone left and the lights dimmed automatically, I stayed behind for a few minutes. No noise, no demands, no footsteps approaching with another list of errands, just the low hum of the servers and the faint reflection of the sunset on the glass. I closed my laptop, straightened my chair, took my jacket from the backrest and put it on slowly, deliberately, and for the first time since this whole thing began, I felt something unclench inside me, like a fist finally opening. Not triumph, not spite, just peace. On my way out, I stood for a moment in the doorway, looking back at the quiet office. The same desks, the same blinds, the same carpet, but everything was different now. Not because he was gone, but because I wasn't the same man who let him stay. I locked the door behind me, stepped into the cool evening air, and walked toward my car without rushing. No weight on my shoulders, no voice barking my name, no threat hanging over my head. Just the clean, steady satisfaction of knowing I didn't get even. I got free. I poslednia straka chasty. I started the engine, rolled down the window, and drove home with the kind of quiet that finally felt like mine.